of all the laments that come our way with COVID-19 hitting and us having to evaluate what got slowed down in different ways, this is definitely one of the things at the top of the list. The part that the board, I don't think commissioners were all that aware of because it was a couple months off in the future, but the month of June had been programmed where every workshop was going to be related to the rollout of the TARP 3 and 4 work around rules, classifications, and all of that work. And then we had to change course. Today you're going to hear what the new timeline is for implementation, so you get a sense. The work has continued forward. It did have to get hit on pause for a few months while we were completely underwater, and then Scott and Joanna came back in early as two of the and Gail as the executive sponsors for the work and said, we really want to get this work moving again, and we have found a way to again get the work moving. And so what was important to me is that we reshare the new timelines with you, because I think a lot of people don't actually believe that we're moving along on this because it's been a long and challenging process, but we have a lot in front of us. It remains an important priority for this year and beyond. And with that, I will turn it right over to, I don't know if Elizabeth's going to drive first or anyone else. I'll listen and then be a part of the conversation at the end.
Yes, I will kick off, and I believe Janet is navigating the PowerPoint. So Janet, can you please advance those slides? Next slide, please. Next one. So I am here on behalf of the sponsors for TARP 1, Karen Francois and myself. Karen Francois is actually on vacation this week, so she couldn't be here. So she extends her apologies. We've been the executive sponsors of this work for the last, I believe, 2 years or 18 months. And I also want to acknowledge that Kathy Adine, our public health director, is also a key sponsor of this work as well. Janet, you could advance to the next slide, please. As you know, or this, yep, right here. So the county board is responsible for our vision, mission, and goals. Each year you guys adopt this, and this is really important. From a leadership standpoint, next part, please. We are responsible for determining our values and our strategic priorities. And we engage a project team across the organization at all levels of the organization in terms of our TARP work, talent attraction, retention, and promotion. However, words are only good if you don't model the behaviors that we, in terms of doing our work. And so that's why it's very important at the individual level that people model our values within the organization. Next slide. You guys are familiar with the values, hopefully. Hopefully it's the first thing you see on your screensaver when you open up your laptop every day. And you'll see this in cubicles, in offices across the county. People have this hanging on their door, their offices. You also see it in our budget book, our strategic plan, our performance measure, and you see us referencing this many times when we're speaking before the county board. I do want to read our value statement out loud because we worked really hard to do this, and that is: Ramsey County is a welcoming, accessible, and inclusive organization. Our core values define our culture. They guide who we are as a county, our individual behaviors, and our operational decision-making. And just to give an example of that, so for example, if you look at our value on people, where we respect one another by cultivating strong relationships, teamwork, recognition, and growth. So an example of an operating decision is our organization investing in employee growth, development, and recognition. This goes to things such as our tuition reimbursement, training programs, other things that we invest to ensure that people have opportunities for growth and development. An example of an individual behavior is a supervisor or a manager sharing knowledge and power. So an employee may say, I feel valued as a person when I see my supervisor manager sharing knowledge and power. So that gives you an example of the importance of operational decision-making as well as individual behaviors. Next slide, please. This gives you a timeline of the work that TARP 1 has been working on. And I know this is really hard to read, but in essence, we started this work at the end of December 2018. We galvanized a team, and from January to March of 2019, we worked to develop the values, define them, come up with examples of the behaviors that may go along with it, wordsmithing it, going back and forth, consulting with various folks across the organization. From March to April of last year, we spent a lot of time communicating this work. So working with our communications department, putting it in our newsletters, articles, doing walkarounds across various shifts at all levels. We did this as part of our budget walkarounds as well, promoting it. And as you know, by June, this is where the Values Wheel was developed. And then towards the end of last year, we started developing what's called a change management team, because words are we didn't want them just to be words on a shelf or on a poster board. We really want to ensure that there's an implementation and a behavioral side of this. So we galvanized a new team called the change management team at the end of last year. And they were responsible for the next steps. So next slide, please. And this was pre-COVID, and it was, we engaged with the consultant, Culture Brokers, Lisa Tabor, and she's been a huge key consultant in this work to help us facilitate workshops and conversations and surveys for our organization to guide behaviors that we think model our values. And so it was our intent to have these workshops and then condense them down to very specific examples. Then in working in partnership with TARP2 and our HR team, we would operationalize this work. So this really involved a three-stage process. And the first one was first identifying and defining vital behaviors for demonstrating these values and condensing it down. And we did this through electronic means. And so we had planned 10 workshops during this time. And I think we had gotten like 2 or 3 workshops done by the time the pandemic hit. And then the second part of this phase was to develop a method to inform, observe, measure, and report our behaviors. And so this involved our HR tools and working in partnership, and as well as some communication tools. Then the last phase of this was to include developing behavioral improvement plans and resources that demonstrate our core values. And HR will talk about this in TARP 2, but example of that is our performance evaluations, ensuring that our values are embedded in it. Then also our competency models, and they will speak more to that in a few minutes here. But again, we were in the process of identifying those behaviors, and in the next slide, we had to revise our timeline because of the pandemic to move this later this year. So it's our intent to resume those workshops and to get these behaviors identified between September and November of this year. Then we'll go back to our change management team to adopt it. Then in the next slide, please. We'll have our leaders start preparing for implementation in November. So this is really part of the continuous improvement process where it's plan, check, and do, and learn from what's working and what's not. But then it's our hope for TARP 1 that we fully operationalize our task in this work and that this is embedded across the organization. Next prompt, please. And you can see that November 20 and beyond, we hope to end TARP 1, so to speak, and have this embedded within our other TARP 2, 3, 4 themes and operationalize across the organization. Next slide, please. I just want to recognize the core team that's working on this. As I mentioned, Deputy County Manager Karen Francois, myself, Kathy Gadeen, Shantan Howell, our project manager. Then next slide or next prompt, please. These were key folks who work at all levels across the organization and represent all the service teams who are part of this change management team. And with that, I'll hand it over to TARP Tool and hand it over to Gail and HR.
Of course, I have to remember to unmute myself, so that was a quick pivot there. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm also going to be sharing my presentation time with Sandy Blazer and Ann Feynman, our 2 deputy directors. So under TARP Theme 2, next slide. This focus is, or the overall work effort is really to help design, to create a place where we can attract, retain, and promote top talent within the county. And that means that we need to be the champion of the employee experience. So work under Theme 2 is focused on HR being a stronger strategic partner, essence of understanding, customizing, and executing on our talent strategies to support service and strategic team priorities. It really means here that we're going to be needing to ensure that HR moves from that transactional focus, getting the transactional activities done, to where we have both a strong foundational operations where we have consistent, timely, and seamless administrative processes that happen that supports then our ability to focus on being strategic partners where we know we understand the business of the departments and can anticipate their needs. It's being more proactive. Across the country, HR, both public and private sector organizations are really working to shift their approach to help the business side of the organization meet their objectives and priorities, to help drive innovation in an organization, and also then help mitigate the barriers that might come along the way. Our HR service model has been aligned with departments for quite some time, and we're working to align it with the service team model so that we can leverage and be leveraged by the service team model that we operate under to both better and more effectively support Ramsey County's organizational strategies and priorities. It's really critical that we help provide the leadership within HR for race, equity, and inclusion, and that it's at the forefront of all that we do. We need to be intentional about recruiting diverse talent, have a talent strategy that aligns with that, and that our practices encompass equity and inclusion throughout the employee experience, through our career development, with the culture of learning and development for our employees, support for that, and continuing through as employees leave our organization. Next slide, and I'll hand it off to Sandy Blazer.
So this work really got started back in about March of 2019, 18. We did a rapid assessment of our HR work and our HR operations. So with the help of our consultant, ROIG, there were a number of focus groups that were conducted and looked at how we're organized, what the pain points are, not only for our customers in terms of the leaders of the organization, but also for employees, as well as our own self. We looked at where those pain points are. Ultimately, what came out of that is a report. You can actually find it online on the TARP 2 page on RamseyNet. There's the entire report is there. One of the key takeaways from the report was that we needed to establish a different organizational structure for HR. And so rather than having all of these functional areas reporting to one director, we've taken the functional areas and really divided them into what we call the talent team and what we call the enterprise team, led by the two deputy directors, myself and Anne. And that allows us to look at holistically the different components of what's going on within HR. Another piece that came out of the rapid assessment was the launching of 3 action teams. So this is really the work that's getting done down into the functional areas. One of the teams looked at the work of HR general services. These teams were created, I think we called it a co-creation process. We actually identified a champion within the HR office for each one of the action teams. We put together teams around those items, and then they went about looking at identifying, surveying ourselves and others for what are the most effective processes, and really identifying those. Our next phase of work, which Anne will talk a little bit more about, is implementing those findings. But that's what we did with the general services team. So we organized. These were looking at ways to organize, improve effectiveness. We also looked at process improvement. So as Gail was talking about the move from transactional to more strategic, the base for that is foundational excellence. And so we have identified several processes that will allow us to really get that work right and become very effective at that. So those processes included the hiring process. We've looked at our tuition reimbursement process, how we deal with short and long-term disability insurance claims, and retiree billing. And you'll see that these represent sort of mile markers or key places along that employee life cycle from the point we bring them into the organization to the point that folks retire from our organization. And then the last action group that we put together was around a new performance management process and aligning that with the countywide culture and values. So this is building on a lot of the work that the TARP 1 folks have done and that Elizabeth alluded to. So we've created we've created some tools that we will be using as we go forward. And again, we've done a lot of this laying of the framework, foundation work, and we'll talk about how we move that forward. The last thing I wanted to mention is the team effectiveness work that we did with each of our units. And so we actually went through some assessments to look at how, what our strengths are, how we lead, how we show up with one another. So it went from sort of individual effectiveness to team effectiveness. The other piece that we've looked at as part of this effectiveness work, though, is performance measures. I think you're all familiar with the workforce statistics, which tell a lot of the story about how we hire, who we hire. So you get a lot of information about that. But we want to take that further into the functional areas of our organization. So we want to look at benefits. We want to look at organizational development. We want to look at labor relations. We want to look at all the different parts of our team and begin to measure and tell that story about what it's like to come to Ramsey County, what it's like to be at Ramsey County. So that work, again, we've identified some measures, and we're now shifting into sort of the implementation phase of all of that. So I'm going to flip it over to Anne to talk about the moving it all forward.
Thanks, Sandy. So next slide, please. Thank you. So Anne Feynman, Deputy Director of the Talent Team in HR, newest to this work, but super excited to be here. So just reporting out what Sandy talked about with regard to beginning to kind of wrap up phase 1 and move into the phase 2 implementation phase. So one of the things that we've done is come up with a model to make sure that we are realigning how we deliver services specific to the service teams to really help strengthen and uplift the service teams, but also to make sure, and it's more about just putting people in a certain place, right? And just saying, okay, these are the folks that are going to support IPR, for example, and more about how do we make sure that we are essentially integrating the services that we provide across our HR team, not just one piece of the work, and then really providing that full wraparound service to that specific service team. So we've developed a model for that, and we are going to be providing that information to the service teams and getting feedback for that as we begin to move to the phase 2 implementation piece of that. The second piece that we did was develop a performance management model. I will say we tend to be a little paper heavy here in the county, and so one of the things that we also did alongside of this was work through the IT governance committee to begin a process where we can do some discovery around implementing tools to help us be more efficient and effective in our work, and have those tools technology support us as we work through performance management. I want you to think about performance management from the positive employee life cycle perspective, in terms of making sure that we are investing in our employees, that we are a continuous learning organization who supports developing our employees along the competency model, and that we are investing in the advancement, if that's what our employees want, to move in the organization, but that it's really about how we value our folks, right? And so it's not, sometimes I think people have a negative connotation of performance management, and that's not what this model is meant to do. And so we've developed this model that is aligned with a competency model, which speaks specifically to professional competencies that we expect of our employees, but then also aligns with those values. So as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, this is really about putting those values into action and saying, hey, if you come to the county, this is what we expect of you. And this is what you can expect from us, right? How we are treated and the type of culture that we want to create for our folks. And so along with that, there's an individual development plan. Again, very different from corrective action plans or performance improvement plans. An individual development plan is tailored specifically to a person's current competencies, what competencies they want to develop. It aligns directly with those. And they can do that in many ways, through continuous learning, through training. They can do it through on-the-job experiences, those kinds of things. And then to align with that, so that it's the full employee cycle, we also develop performance appraisal forms as well. And that's the accountability piece, right? And we want to make sure that those tools provide conversation plates, essentially, or templates for our managers and supervisors to have this continued conversation with our employees about how they want to develop here at Ramsey County. The really cool thing is that we have launched this within HR, and we are working on our own individual development plans and having those conversations with our folks internally first, with plans as we implement this to then pilot it or launch it, I should say, with a couple of different departments from the continuous improvement model aspect, right? Where can we improve this and those kinds of things. One of the unique things about that, though, is that we are launching it first within HR because we have to become experts in this, right? In order to be able to develop our supervisors and managers along performance management and really help to then encourage this model of performance management. The last thing that we have done is develop a communications plan in terms of how we are going to communicate, all of the work to the service teams to say, here's what we've done so far, here's where we need your feedback, and here's how we're going to continue to keep you up to date within the work that we are doing from a TARP 2 strategic HR perspective. So we're super excited about phase 2 and those steps that come next as we begin to implement that work, and we've begun to essentially create a roadmap about how we're going to get there. So with that, I'm going to hand that over to Gail to wrap up.
We can go to the next slide. So like everyone, our work has been redirected, but our consultant has continued to work with our team where they can and working with us in our focused area to be able to continue this work. You can see our original May 2020 date has been pushed to September on this phase 1 work. I think it's important for me to note that this is a journey for us. It's not a one and done. We within HR need to grow in this along with the organization. So phase 1 focused on, as Sandy and Ann have talked about, identifying and developing our internal effectiveness within HR, and then the strategies, models, and roadmap for our work. Our next phase is going to be on implementing this work, getting the feedback and doing our continuous improvement so that we learn and grow and are better able to support the organization, that we can be nimble, that we can flex, and we can modify as needed. Really, the impact of the TARP 2 work is generally about positioning HR as a strong business partner in support of the county's strategies, values, and goals. But more importantly, the impact of this TARP 2 work will also help position the county to achieve the goals that we have set for our residents and communities in-house. It's about improving the employee experience, modeling the values, and investing in our goals of well-being, opportunity, prosperity, and accountability for our own employees as well. So that wraps up our presentation here. We can hand it over for TARP 3 and 4.
Before we do that, I just want to say thank you so much. We've received a good deal of information already, and commissioners have been quite patient and listening and not just jumping in yet, but we've absorbed a lot, and I do have a commissioner who has a question or comment. I'm going to call in Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Chair Carter. Yeah, this is all really good stuff, and as I'm listening and trying to see the vision, well, I see the vision, but so a couple things. One, Ann, when you were talking about the performance plan, almost constantly you have to really kind of qualify that this isn't what is traditionally viewed as a performance plan. We need to move away from that. So we need to find something else to call it, right? Otherwise, we tend to focus on what this is not rather than what it is. That's just my feedback. And then two is, in my head, I'm thinking, how do we, you know, as we transition and build this within the county, within our workforce, our 4,000 employees, but how do we get ahead of this as we bring employees in? How do we start when we hire people? They understand this is the mission of the county. We're value-based here in everything we do. This is what you can expect, so that we're hiring people that want to be a part of an organization that is moving in this direction from the get-go, rather than bringing on in our traditional way of hiring, then trying to, you know, educate, whatever word you want to use once we have them on board. But is there a way, and I know this is a lot of work, but is there kind of a way to do a parallel process, right? Working with our current workforce and moving forward on this value-based work we're doing, but then also this parallel approach of how do we actually build our foundation so as we make these hires and people are coming in the door, we're already ahead of the game. Does that make sense? I see head shaking, so I'm thinking maybe you've already talked about that a little bit, but those were my two feedbacks as of this far.
And why don't you take a shot at it, and then I'll back clean up a little bit on it, if that's okay.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Commissioner McDonough. I appreciate the feedback specific to the individual development plan. I mean, I think you're exactly right, and I think coming up with maybe a different name so that we're not having to express that it's something that has been associated with a negative connotation. I think that's really great feedback, so I appreciate that. Specific to regard to, yes, we want to improve and move along our culture and obviously have to set the expectations and those kinds of things for our current employee base. There are a couple of things that we can do, and we've talked about strengthening, one, our new employee orientation, right, and getting folks onboarded in a way that expresses this is, you know, what we expect in this culture, and we will treat you that way as well, right? So that that employee's experience when they first onboard is they feel value through that process. So we've talked a little bit about how do we change that, and also how do we help streamline it, because right now it's also a paper-driven process, and so including some more efficient technology solutions will also, I think, assist the employee in getting onboarded more effectively and efficiently and create a consistent experience for folks. So those are some of the things that we're exploring now. The other piece to that is we need to incorporate into our interviewing questions as well, questions around, and we do this specific to racial equity, which I think is really incredibly important, but we need to make sure that we are hiring people who are going to align with our values as well. So from the very get-go, right, from the time that we are bringing talent in and through that process of attracting talent, that we are speaking to those values. And then we have to show up in the community, and as we are attempting to recruit and attract talent, we have to be making sure that we are speaking to those values and demonstrating those values as well.
Madam Chair, I just add one thing to Ann's comments. You know, I think when you get an opportunity to be a part of the new redesigned new employee orientation, both pre-COVID and now even as it's gone virtual, what I would say is it's unequivocal in the statement of countywide values and where we're going in a way that sets a stage that didn't exist when I joined the organization, for example, back in 2013, where it was much more your department will kind of lay out the values for you type message. I think we need to make sure that once we go through new employee orientation, we continue to think about the service team and departmental reinforcements of those values is a big part of our ongoing work when a new employee comes on. I very much agree with Anna on the front end, but I will say I think we've made headway. I think the biggest challenge when we lay this out and look ahead is for longer standing employees who understandably at times say, well, this is a little different than when I joined here. And it's both, we can be respectful and saying, yeah, but the world around us changes. The board talks about this every week. We have to find ways to change and grow with a community that expects that of us. I think that's the bigger challenge. And I know you all receive messages at times to that effect, and we've appreciated the support throughout. And I think maintaining a steadfast commitment to like, that is the next big step we take on, both through our service delivery planning here that's happening on the fly and these values. It all fits together at this moment in time.
Thank you. And before we move on to the rest, I just want to say that this really has so far been so very informative, and the manner in which you've aligned the presentation and are moving through it is so informative. That first work around aligning core values to behaviors. You know, it sounds simple at first when you think about it, but it is so foundational and fundamental to see that work happening and the promise of its impact to culture across the entire organization is so great. And then to hear the TARP 2 piece, which really does put human resources front and center as that strategic partner, even providing ownership in that area for our key focuses on equity and ensuring that that work is led from that foundation, I think is so very key, leading to how we establish that culture, how we have the ongoing conversations that we need to have, by the way, about culture. I think our reputation precedes us in a lot of cases, and I have been able to be a part also of that first onboarding that we've done electronically, our first electronic onboarding, and to hear the manner in which we are sharing and espousing and giving that foundation of what Ramsey County's vision, mission, goals, values, you know, are, and sharing even our strategic priorities and the work that we are doing in that regard is important. So that ongoing conversation, and at the root of that is this whole thing around performance planning. And as Commissioner McDonough just stated, you know, that performance process is so important, and whether we call it performance management or, you know, whatever we call it, it has to be done, and it has to be that ongoing conversation. And knowing that so many people do consider it to be a negative thing sets us, you know, in the wrong position. So the more we can put that forward as the conversation that we're having ongoing as an organization or as a manager and an employee or across the organization about what we're all working toward, makes our common goals, you know, all this common work so very important, as it should be key to that whole conversation. Again, that does put human resources in this place of needing to be the place of innovation, of needing to be the place of resource, of setting that tone for inclusion and showing the work. So I'm also thankful to hear that this first work around performance planning is happening in human resources, and that that will set the model and set a tone for the entire organization. Again, how important that leadership is. And I look forward to hearing more as we hear more about the organizational work we're doing around equity, about how human resources does, you know, find itself at the center of all of that work, lifting it all up and perpetuating it throughout the employee base, throughout the organization. But back to the performance planning, and then I'm going to let it go. I don't know if you call it something different, because it really is about our performance. It really is about that being a good thing, and about the fact that we want to lift up, support, and even celebrate, you know, those positives that we see that show the behaviors, you know, and that show the performance that we need. So I wouldn't go so fast at, you know, changing the name or calling it something different, although I truly appreciate the reason we might think we should. And I just wanted to make sure to say that. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the next set of information. I'm looking to see if anyone else has a question right at this point. I see Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for this great work. And just, it's exciting, and I really appreciate that you felt that we needed to continue to work on this even while we're working on all the emergencies at hand. That this is continuing to be part of our work, because, as you've been saying, it's about who we hire and how our employees work in this environment. So I think it's appropriate that we continue to think about this work. So my question is, can you just talk a little bit about how we're portraying this, like on our website or to incoming prospective employees? You know, we want to hire people that share our values, and so I know that when people apply for jobs, they interview the employer as much as the interviewer interviews the potential employee. So I know that they look on our website and they try to find, what kind of a county are we, and we hope that all of our work speaks for itself. But I know they go onto our website and sort of see what kind of work do we do and how do we do it. So could you just talk a little bit about how we're relaying this to prospective employees?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Boyer, I think I would encourage you to take a moment to read the Deputy County Manager link that I sent you the other day to see very directly with the job right at the top on how we set that tone and what values are listed in that job. Employees consistently remark in the interviews, and I don't want to pretend I sit in every interview for the organization, but a consistent thread through, if you were to ask Deanna Pesek, for example, one of the last rounds I was on, or Alex Kutza, the last interviews I was a part of, both of them expressed part of the attraction to the organization was the people they had talked to about what they valued about this organization and the values that they saw alongside the strategic plan and work of the organization. These are things that have been seen as recruitment tools for the type of talented individuals we're bringing in. And I would so the orientation piece then becomes another part, but I would just say that, and I'll leave it with Ann Feynman. I mean, Ann's relatively new to this organization. I don't know if she wants to share thoughts from when she first came here, but I met Ann through the recruiting process to come to Ramsey County. So I don't know if she can weigh in at all on that.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner, for that question. I think, one of the things that specifically attracted me to this role when I was looking at job announcements, right, was what was the language specifically in the job announcement is that, we value these things. It's up there front and center for folks to see. And then the examples of work that are provided in those job descriptions specifically align and speak to those values. And so I think it has been a good thing that HR has been really intentional lifting those up specific in job descriptions and job announcements, right? This is advertising essentially how we value people. And I think that piece is really important. But I think the second piece speaks to the interview process. We've been really intentional in the county in making sure that we are diversifying the panels. And I know when I first came in, and I've worked in other organizations that was not the case. But I interviewed with a panel of 3 or 4, maybe 5 people who were all had diverse backgrounds and those kinds of things. And so again, speaking to our values, because we're demonstrating those through the process. And I will just say from my own experience, I was incredibly impressed by how communicative the county was in terms of where they were in the steps of the process. And I think we've also been very intentional about that. And that has been really helpful in making sure that we're attracting talent.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I knew we were doing things, and I'm glad to hear you say them again, because I think it does matter. I think it matters who we attract. And I'm glad to hear that we're working on, or that we're getting, that our responsive rate on where people are at in the process is I don't want to say improving, but I'd heard from people years ago, how it was hard for them to know where they were in the process. And so I think you've been working on that, and it shows. So thank you for that, for the department recognizing that prospective employees want to know, where they're at. So thank you for all that.
So just a final question before we move on. I know that we are looking at TARP 2 and the process improvements that you spoke about before, hiring, tuition reimbursement, disabilities payments, and retiree billing. Is this TARP 2 phase 1? There's certainly other processes that we can look at. And does this go further as we work through TARP 1? Example, will we be looking at promotion process, even the exiting employees from our employment process as we move forward? Is there thinking around that?
Yeah, and I hope it's.
Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Ann. I'll let you.
I was just going to say it's a great segue to TARP 3.
TARP 3 had that in it? Whoops, I don't remember that. Okay, let's move ahead then.
But I'd also like to add that within our own work, this is about creating efficiencies. And so we will be looking at where are ways that we can have process improvements so that we can redirect our work from transactional, paper-based and inefficient services to redirect them to a higher level. It's the talent team that Ann's working with and Sandy on the enterprise team to identify ways to improve our internal work so that our staff resources can go to a higher and better use. Having a talent strategy, doing that proactive outreach, making sure that we're not only building the pipeline and helping, working with obviously communications on telling that Ramsey County story. So these were just highlighting some of our initial pain points and single points of failure that we thought were ripe to create efficiencies. So we will continue in that work within TARP 2 as well.
Thank you. All right, I'll turn it back over to you.
I can go to Scott on the next slide with TARP 3.
All right, thank you. I will kick things off with good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I will kick things off with TARP 3 and TARP 4. We are, along with Joanna Berg and Gail Blackstone, we three are the sponsors for TARP 3 and TARP 4. As a reminder, TARP 3 is modernize our personnel rules to align with culture and values. And theme 4 is to modernize our job classification and compensation plans. We are managing TARP themes 3 and 4 together as a unified project team. There are a number of benefits to doing it that way, not the least of which is we're using the same vendor, Gallagher Benefit Services, as a consultant for theme 3 and theme 4. Gallagher is very experienced doing class and compensation planning in this market, and by this market I mean the local government market, and also this Minnesota and particularly the Twin Cities metropolitan area market. They also have a local presence here, even though they're a nationwide company. The local presence was actually very useful for us up until the pandemic hit, and now, of course, everything is remote. There are overlapping issues between TARP 3 and TARP 4. For example, TARP 3, part of the personnel rules is to set classifications. Well, TARP 4 is actually going to be setting a new, class and comp schedule. And another example is some of the feedback we've gotten from our focus groups around personnel rules have to do with lack of clarity around job progression through one's career with Ramsey County. Well, TARP 4 lays out a series of job families across departments. So there are these overlapping issues that just it's helpful to manage both of these themes as one project. Next slide, please. Our personnel rules, of course, talk about, contain our policies and processes for filling vacancies, determining compensation, or contain our probationary rules for new employees and newly promoted employees, talk about process for disciplinary action, appeals, and ultimately the process for separation from the county, which would include exit interviews to get to at an earlier point. Early on in this process, we held focus groups made up of hiring managers and directors from throughout our organization. We did that in September with some follow-up interviews happening into early October. We heard from our departments about things like a need for increased flexibility to hire and retain talented employees, particularly employees of color. We heard, about some concerns about the time it can take to fill certain positions. We heard the rules can be difficult to understand and can be hard to find what you're looking for. We've got feedback about how the rules are written in a manner that does not value employees, is not reflective of our values. And one of the things that came through very clearly in conversations with our managers and folks that spend a lot of their time doing hiring was a need for training and more consistent understanding of our existing rules and policies, because there was a really uneven application of existing rules and a lack of understanding of what we have in place now. So really emphasized the need for us to do additional training. Following that, we did a survey of comparable organizations. I believe the returns were something around the order of 29 responses we got from comparable sized organizations from throughout the country and from this region. We asked them about recruiting and hiring practices, benefits, how they handle their compensation administration. What are their policies on training, promotion, recognition, and workforce planning? And we tailored the questions of the survey around some of the feedback we got in our focus groups. In the focus groups, we heard our managers would throw out ideas about, well, what about we do this? Or I wonder if other organizations do that. So we use that as an opportunity to get some feedback. Around policies, hiring practices, benefits. For example, people throw out ideas like, well, what about, we hear complaints about employee parking. Do other organizations pay employee parking? Do they have on-site daycare? Do they have pet insurance? I didn't even pet insurance was a thing. Spoiler alert, most other organizations don't do any of those things, but it was good for us to check in on those things and a number of other ideas that we got along the way, so we could see where we fit, amongst our peers. So there was some really valuable information there that we can use going forward as we rewrite our personnel rules. We found that we shouldn't say we found, but it was pointed out to us that our rules and policies that govern employees are found in multiple areas, which contributes to the confusion when people are trying to look for, well, where are the leave policies? Where is this? Where is that? In addition to our personnel rules, there's also Chapter 4 of the Administrative Code that deals with HR matters, like workplace or background screening, drug-free workplace, respectful workplace is in the admin code, as is paid parental leave, whereas all the other types of leave are covered in the benefits policies. And then we also have Chapter 9 of the admin code, which is Code of Ethics. So we're going to try to, as part of TARP 3 and the rewrite, bring all of these to the extent we can, into one place, one document, one set of online, one place online, as much as we can, to make it even more user-friendly for employees. One of the challenges of that is as we try to collate that into a unified document, we still have to keep track of what's an admin code versus what's a benefit policy versus what's a personnel rule, because the processes for changing each of those are a little bit different. Our intent today isn't to go into the weeds of what those differences are, but just to assure you there are weeds that have to be dealt with as we walk through this, and that is going to take some time. But the ultimate goal is to try to bring everything into one document to make things user-friendly for employees. We got feedback about existing rules containing complicated language, written at an advanced reading level. So we're rewriting them in language that can be easier to understand. This is particularly important as we bring employees into the organization for whom English is a second language. And then we heard much earlier about TARP 1. One of our goals at TARP 3 is to incorporate the values from TARP 1. You saw the values wheel. We see it every time we log into our computer, the people, integrity, community, equity, leadership. We want to make sure that those values and those behaviors are written into our personnel rules going forward. For example, and this was I think this is a great example. The term probation, 31-year, local government employee probation. I've been on probation several times as I've changed jobs and been promoted, and it's just part of being in government. Probation for a lot of our community has a very negative connotation. So we are looking at a new term called new enroll, and looking at embedding that into our personnel rules. But that comes with challenges because there's a lot of institutional inertia behind that word probation, because it's written into our state laws and it's written into our labor contracts. So we have to consider that as we try to figure out how we make that change going forward. And as I alluded to earlier, there are overlapping issues with TARP 4. So some of TARP 3 is going to be tied to TARP 4. We'll have to wait for TARP 4 to get closer to its conclusion before we can wrap up all the loose ends of TARP 3. So that's TARP 3, and going to the next slide, I will hand it off to Joanna Berg.
Thank you, Scott. When we talk in theme 4 about modernizing our job classifications and our compensation plans, what we mean here is that we end up with jobs that are all classified appropriately, and that compensation for those positions is competitive and equitable. We also need the organization to have policies and procedures to keep the class and compensation system up to date. And connecting back to what we heard in TARP 2, that it's an easy to understand and administer system. Class and compensation updates are massive undertakings. Organizations undertake them maybe once a generation. Ramsey County hasn't done it in more than 25 years. We began working with Gallagher Benefit Services on the position description questionnaire process that kicked off in the spring of 2019. Every Ramsey County employee had an opportunity to provide input. These PDQs were the foundation that were used by Gallagher to develop the new job classification structure. Similarly to TARP 3, Gallagher surveyed comparable organizations, public and private sector. For salary data, we know we compete both with the public and for some positions, the private sector. They have moved to organize classifications into job families that will provide additional career pathways. We're looking at a significantly reduced number of job classifications coming out of this process. We have over 600 today, and we're aiming to be closer to 300 at the conclusion of this work. Every job description in the county is being updated. As part of that process, we're looking at minimum qualifications, clarity of the roles and responsibilities. And again, you're seeing the TARP 1 values were built into this process as we talked with Gallagher about our overall approach to job classification and compensation. Next slide, please. I don't believe I personally have ever done a PowerPoint where 2 very brief bullets have behind them a greater level of work. There is a massive amount of work currently in progress. Gallagher is reviewing, has drafted personnel rules for the county to review. We're receiving these in batches, and there's an intensive effort primarily in Ann's area, but also in Sandy's area, reviewing and providing feedback on these updated rules. Our same staff in those 2 areas are looking at Gallagher's draft classification structure and the job descriptions that we are receiving from them. Next slide. Ryan mentioned at the beginning that we had intended to be and initially planned to be at the board the first 2 weeks in June for Gallagher to present their final reports to the county board on TARP 3 and on TARP 4, and then county staff to give the board its move forward recommendations. While Gallagher was able to continue through the emergencies, county staff time were redirected to the higher priorities. And so we are now looking at an end of the year timeline However, I want to mention also that we have, as I referenced, an ongoing strain on resources, particularly in human resources, with the same staff being asked to do this detailed work on TARP 3 and TARP 4. So the sponsors are beginning to talk about uncoupling the TARP 3 and 4 timelines, prioritizing TARP 4 over TARP 3 to enable us to get that TARP 4 work done, along with the key personnel rules in TARP 3 that support class and compensation. We will we'll be able to update the board further on that over the coming weeks, but it is possible that we will not be coming back to the board with a TARP 3 final report until early in the new year. And with that, Scott and I and Gail are happy to take questions, discussions on TARP 3 and 4, or anything you might have for any of the sponsors here today.
Madam Chair, if I could just put a bow on with a couple final thoughts, and then I'll stand too. I appreciate the opportunity to walk through this with everybody today, and I appreciate the board's immediate recognition of the interlocking nature of all these different parts of the work. It is daunting to move it all at once, but I really don't know. It feels artificial to move components individually. At a moment in time where we're talking about service design changes, the timing for this actually could not be better. And as we think about new ways to work and new ways to build expectations and new ways to provide flexibility to individuals in their day-to-day life and to leverage technology and better serve residents, all of this comes at the right time. The individuals who have spoken have put in a lot of late nights and early hours, and more than any other project, I think, short of what you're seeing right now with public health and testing sites where your director's there every weekend too. This is the type of stuff that really shows the quality of leadership across this organization. And they don't know I was going to do that, but I want to take a moment to recognize them and those individual efforts. It does not go unnoticed from where I sit. And my final thing I would add, I think from an optimistic standpoint, just so the board is aware, there was some, we planned for implementation this year from a resource perspective. Nothing that has occurred so far in this work or in terms of what we are finding out seems to be woefully out of step with those initial plans. We are planning a multi-year implementation depending upon cost and budget and everything else. But it's not like we're going to get this back and then say we never thought about that piece. I just wanted to mention the financial piece and also say the good news that I heard from the TARP 4 team in my last conversation, I don't want to oversell it, was on the whole, Ramsey County is a relatively market competitive place to work. And that's a good place from which to start, because if we weren't starting from there, it becomes a lot more expensive. And our day-to-day experience generally supports that. We've seen jobs like the correctional health nursing job where we were well out of step and had to make a pretty significant change a few years ago. But on the whole, the combination of our work on the values pieces on number 1 and 2, people go to work for the values. Compensation is one of those things that helps people stay rewarded and continue to be there. But we are riding a wave of talent attraction that I hope this board has been able to notice. And I thank you all for driving us and pushing us to continue forward in this work. I think it's a long-term part of this organization's pursuit of excellence.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Commissioner McDonough and then Commissioner McGuire. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Carter. I've got a few things here. I'll just throw them out and people can grab them everywhere they think it is. But this is more, these first two are kind of related to the class and compensation. I'll just say it. As we look at how we compensate our employees and reward employees, one of the things that's always been really difficult for me is, the longevity raises, right? We give people raises because they've been here, not necessarily because they've accomplished anything. And how does that tie into, rewarding folks with compensation based on gained expertise, gained value to the county? And that comes sometimes with being a part of an organization for a while, but it has to be tied to something more than just number of years, right? I hit 5 years, I get a raise, extra raise. I hit 10 years, I get an extra raise. And just making sure I bring that up. I know you, as you guys are working through this, you understand that, but there's some really transformational change opportunities here in how we take a look at compensating folks. And I know, we've got union contracts, and we've got PELRA, and we've got all these other things that intersect. But the more we can attach compensation to value added to the organization, right, and working and living the values of this organization and really rewarding what we're looking for, I think the stronger we're going to be. And this is somewhat related, but my experience, I've been through many different organizations in my life, is so often the most effective employee, most passionate employee, the one that gets the biggest results working on the front lines, we pull them out of there. We move them up to an admin role, or we give them a supervisory role, and we think it's about this career path, right? But we're taking probably the strongest person we had working on the front lines, and for them to get compensated and to be able to grow, we've created that's what we need to do. And what does it look like if we create a career path where an individual could actually stay where they're the most passionate and actually continue to add the most value and benefit to us as an organization, being on the front line, right? It's not necessarily about moving up, it's about being rewarded. And a lot of times those people aren't necessarily your best supervisors or your best administrative people, but we've created this culture of, to really feel like you're on this career path, you move up, and you no longer are working on the front lines, where actually that individual probably their true passion and joy for working, in their reward that they get is actually having that impact. And so what does a compensation plan look like? What does a career path look like for somebody who may stay in kind of that same job, but continues to grow and do it better every year for us? And then the third piece that I just want to make sure we're talking about, eyes wide open, right? And I know a number of you heard me say this, because this is, again, transformative. And, we're going to have, and I use these numbers somewhat without data, but I've actually been and seen some presentations about this. When you have these organizational change, a piece of your workforce is going to be like, oh, what took you so long? They're on board already, right? They get it. They're excited about it. And you've got like a group that are going to be active resistors. They don't want any change whatsoever. They're going to try to protect everything that they've got right now. And then you've got a group in the middle that can go either way, right? And how do we make sure that we're driving this organization? But part of that is how much effort do we continue to put in with the active resistors, right? How much do we really, as we're doing this, we take a look at, our review process. Are you, someone mentioned, this is what you will get from us as an employer, and this is what we're looking for you as an employee, right? There's a bargain here. There's an agreement about what we're looking at from the front end, and everybody honoring that and respecting that. But then what happens when it's not working the way we expect it to? Not every employee is going to buy into this. Not every employee even the job might not even be the right fit for them. And part of that, I say this, is because when we're having this agreement and we're trying to attract and retain people, if we don't provide a culture that is actually delivering on that, we will lose them people. And a lot of time, that culture gets compromised from people that don't buy into what we're doing, and they're actively working against us creating that culture. And so we put a lot of effort into these people over here that are actively resisting it. The negative consequences come, we lose the good people that we want to stay a part of this organization, because that culture is not a healthy culture they want to be a part of, and they go looking for that elsewhere, versus us actually rolling up our sleeves and ensuring we're creating that culture, holding people accountable to that culture. With that, I'll shut up and listen.
All good points. Was there any response to that, or should we go directly to Commissioner McGuire?
I'll just give one little nugget. Sometimes a good anecdote can help us along the way too. So when I was walking through the new service design sites yesterday, I came across an employee who's at one of the sites, who's someone that at times I think has been at different points along the continuum Commissioner McDonough walked through, right? At different points in their own career at different moments, and has reached out at different points to different commissioners and shared thoughts, and myself and other things. And I saw this employee at a site, and I said, what role are you in out here? And the person explained the new role. They said yes to this new opportunity. And the two things that stood out were the optimism with someone that I have not always seen that with yesterday. And I want to tie this to buildings. The light in the building that the person was in after having worked for many years in a different space had an environmental impact that was significant. And I share this because it does show that we have opportunities around the environmental side as well as the expectation side to do this right. And we have to provide the right types of environments for residents and for employees. That's not to take away anything Commissioner McDonough just said. I agree with all of it. And I just wanted to add that really good story because it was a reminder to me that, like, in that particular instance, like, I had enough to find a way maybe in the past to get that employee to engage. And all of a sudden yesterday, it's like a totally new ball game. And that was a good reminder that, but once we set that bar, then we have to uphold it as we go forward.
Indeed. Thank you. Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that anecdote, County Manager. That really helps. And Commissioner McDonough, yeah, thanks for all of your comments. They're all really relevant, and I agree with them all. I just have a couple of comments, and first of all, just thanks so much for all of this really important work. As I've said before, I want to give a shout out to Scott for using a great term that we don't hear very often, and I thought I'd heard a lot of terms about bureaucracy, but institutional inertia was a great phrase that I know we have to deal with. So thanks for giving me a great phrase to use when we're frustrated by some things that to take sometimes to change because we're dealing with that institutional inertia. I have just a curiosity actually around the Gallagher contract that now has been changed from June 20th to December 20th, and I'm just curious: are they able to just just extend our contract, or do we have to have them on I'm like payroll, but on contract for another 6 months, or do we just get to? Is that an added resource, or do we get to sort of just prolong it for more time at the same rate? Just curious if that's going to affect our budget.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McGuire, it will not affect our budget. The transition from June to December was the target for the final reports to the county board. The contract extends longer than that. Being savvy county employees, we built the contract to be longer than we thought we were going to need, but the value does not change. So there is no cost to the county for this delay.
Thank you for that. I'm proud of you. I should not be surprised that you would be anticipating that kind of thing. And like I said, it was mainly a curiosity on how companies are handling delays like this, which I expect are happening a lot, or not delays, but extended contracts due to emergency situations. So I was basically just curious, but good job and good work on that. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Looking across our participant list, and I don't know if you hear me. Okay, you do. I don't see any additional hands. Just very, very thankful for the presentation today and for the update on this very important work, which we know has been in process. And yes, which I'm certain a number of us have just been panting to receive this update on. A lot of exciting things. And I just want to endorse also the comments that Commissioner McDonough had made about the importance of being able to reinforce, recognize, and reward the kinds of behaviors that we're looking for that do ascribe to our values, and that culture can either be lifted up or it can be damaged when those who are exhibiting those behaviors aren't necessarily recognized or appreciated or valued, or don't feel that way for the work that they are doing and for the behaviors they're exhibiting. And when those who are not ascribing or even complaining, sometimes even hurting the environment, are establishing a different sort of culture that tends to repeat itself if there isn't the differentiation. So I'm also wanting to endorse that we think about how we are rewarding performance and that, I know that it can be very difficult to base it simply upon arbitrary performance. But as we are establishing these values and behaviors, identifying them, also wanting to know that they're connected and appreciating them to performance, or if in some ways developmental milestones could be recognized in performance and level, even in compensation. I know there are some places where we do that, but maybe there are additional opportunities in that regard. I'm also very, very excited about the job families and pathways and the descriptions of how we might navigate our way as employees through onto different levels and different areas of opportunity and responsibility. I hope that as those families and those descriptions are being connected together, those pathways can also be described in ways to help to navigate them. And I had a final question in regard to the work around TARP 3 and TARP 4 and that schedule. I think what you said at the end, Joanna, was that we might see TARP 4 report before we see TARP 3, which could be delayed into the early part of next year. Excited about the min-quals work that's being done, which has so much to do with whether or not we're able to point to, identify, and recruit and hire the talent that we so often know we need. But when minimum qualifications are not reviewed and confirmed, as required in those jobs, we sometimes see the person, know that we've perhaps had an employee in an internship or, in a job experience, and really, really want that person in and are able to hire them because they don't come up in that assessment in the manner in which they should or would if, in fact, we were able to review those and assess them to confirm that they are needed. So there's a lot to be excited about here. I'm pausing a little bit to see if there are other hands which are raised before we complete. I do see Commissioner McDonough's hand, and I think that's a new raise. So I'm going to call on you, and then we'll be preparing to wrap up, asking for final comments before we do. Commissioner McDonough.
I just forgot to lower my hand here.
Okay.
Done.
All right. Oh, all good.
Scheduling side for December, the one thing I would flag for the board is it's pretty tight to the end of the year on Tuesdays, and we see that as we look at our schedule based on the service team quarterly meetings and things having kind of backed up. We may need to explore the idea of how to fit these in as we go forward as the work comes to fruition as we hit the end of the year, and may need to look a little non-traditionally at how we do that relative to how Tuesdays look or whatever. I just want to flag that. I'm not saying for sure, but I'm just trying to look out ahead and be thoughtful so we don't end up on December 24th with everybody on a 4-hour TARP 4.
But that would be for TARP 3. I'm sorry, I missed.
It would be for the compensation work of TARP 4, which would happen in December. I'm just saying there aren't a lot of open slots on Tuesdays right now, so I'm just flagging early that there's a scheduling thing we'll want to be planning over the next month or so.
All right, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. And then TARP 3 could be potentially delayed into January, February of next year? Thank you. Thank you. This has just been very informative. It's important work, and we appreciate your attending to it in this way. Thank you to the hosts, the sponsors of the work, all of you for the stellar work that you've done here. And knowing that the truth of the pudding is in the eating, I think is what they say. We're looking very, very forward to its tastiness as we move toward the end of the year. If there are no final comments, I just want to make sure I don't forget County Connections like I did this morning. Then we are going to adjourn. Thank you so very, very much, everyone. Have a good day.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good work.